There we go. Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight on another episode of Span and Need. Tonight we'll be talking with Maria Stevens, an executive coach and leadership consultant, which will discuss a variety of topics about business, best leadership practices in challenging and changing at times, as well as leaders, how they can thrive during this pandemic. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule tonight, Maria.
My pleasure. Happy to be here. Thanks for hosting.
Not a problem. Well, right now we're in difficult times. We're in a pandemic where a lot of businesses have been shut down for almost 10 weeks. And there's a lot going on with owners of what they want to do and do they want to reopen? Do they want to take that risk with their business? Or do they want to sit back and let kind of the unknowns phase out? Mm-hmm. So we'll talk a little bit about that here down the road. So Maria, tell us how you kind of got started, where you are and where you are now.
Well, so really the beginning of me being in business and doing what I do now started almost 25 years ago in corporate America. And so when I was first out of school, I was really kind of earning my stripes, calling on businesses of all different shapes and sizes and industries. I worked in my title was actually relationship manager, but it was really outside B2B sales. And I worked for a big company and I got awesome experience. And I did that for about 10 years. And what I discovered during that time was that I really loved helping people. I really loved helping people solve problems. I didn't so much enjoy being in the corporate environment. And so I really wanted to find a way to still make an impact or even really make a greater impact, but just have more freedom and flexibility to do that. I always knew my passion was for helping people. So it was really just a matter of trial and error over the years to figure out how could I make that happen. So that led me to graduate school. That led me to a series of different experiences. And ultimately, I ended up deciding that for me to make the kind of impact I wanted to make, it was going to be on my own terms and starting my own business. And so that's what I decided to do. It started really doing some leadership training courses, and it's just evolved over time, right? So like I started out, one of my focuses early in my business was doing a lot of the John Maxwell leadership training, and I still practice many of those principles today, but my practice has really evolved with the changing times and the way that my clients have evolved and when they grow and they ask for other things. And if I see that it's a fit, and if I see that it's something I'm passionate about within my suite of expertise, then I kind of evolve it and add it into my umbrella of services. So it's really just been, it's passion work for me because I love what I do. And being on the entrepreneurial ride isn't always the easiest thing, especially, in this recent period of time. So, but yeah, it was years in the making. But all of those experiences that I had early on is really what helps me be grounded and have the experiences that I'm able to share and relate to clients.
Well, and I think that brings up a great point. You're probably busy right now, and with your talking to business entrepreneurs as well as other business owners that are trying to maneuver around the difficult times that we're in.
Absolutely. So I've been busier probably than I've ever been. And as you and I were talking earlier, I say that with much gratitude to be busy during this time and to be able to be in a position and a capacity such that I can give people perspective and support in a really challenging time. And glad to be able to be in a position to do that because people are being asked to deal with more. As we know, they're being asked to do more. They're being asked for greater commitments. Many employees, if people have been sadly furloughed or laid off, then the folks that are remaining are obviously going to be being asked to do more. I mean, there's so much widespread impact to all of this. So it's a real privilege to be able to be in a position to support people and be a sounding board and just give them another ear and to be a thought partner during this time.
Well, and I know that as the state of Ohio, as well as the country starts opening up, there are a lot of processes and extra stuff that businesses have to do now that many people may not recognize. And I think that brings up what you just mentioned is you're probably getting a lot of calls from people in trying to maneuver when I mentioned a little bit earlier. So what are some general business practice in general that you can give advice to these business owners out there that are trying to maneuver the waters right now?
Well, and I'll say this first. I mean, I certainly, nothing that I'm saying is uh, anything that's like any kind of legal advice or anything like that. So I
Exactly.
just want to put that out there as a disclaimer. But from a leadership standpoint, I think one of the biggest areas where I support people in my work all the time, whether it's during this crisis that we're in or pre or post, is decision making, and that's obviously a key driver of success for businesses. And when we're in uncertainty and when we're in chaos, it can be hard as a leader to know what the right decision is, right? So I think every situation is unique. However, to be able to put together a plan, take a pause, don't be too reactive, right? So sometimes we get difficult news and we react right away. And in the heat of the moment, the emotions there can take over, and that's not always the best kind of outcome. So I think when it comes to making decisions, it's always important to pause, and then it's important to take swift and decisive action because we're not going to have all the information. And one thing I think that we've seen through this pandemic is that, right? So we've all sort of become accustomed now to saying, well, if that happens, or it may happen that way, or we may be doing this in the fall, we may not be. We don't know a lot. So, kind of in the midst of all that uncertainty, we've got to make the best decision. We need to move swiftly because people are relying on us. Employees are needing to know information. So we need to have swift action, but not rash action, if that makes sense. So the key word that I've been using a lot with leaders is having balance with taking action and not hesitating, but also not being rash. Balance with being optimistic, but also realistic, right? We're dealing with a lot of challenge right now. So it's not authentic to say that, wow, this is going to be easier, this is going to be great, because it's a tough time and it's not comfortable for people to live with so much uncertainty. It's not necessarily normal.
And I think that brings up a good point that with all these new guidelines coming in from the governor's office, that makes more people spend more money that they don't really have in a business for the safety of their employees as well as the customers that come in. A lot of these places are now at 25 to 50% capacity.
Right.
So how do you work with a business like that and kind of guide them in this type of turmoil?
Well, the greatest thing that I can do for them is to, again, be that place of support and allow them to kind of navigate, because when they come to me, there's a lot of emotions that are presenting there, right? Because of everything that you just said. So there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of worry. And, it's really touching in a way to see, and we've all seen it. I mean, I think just how concerned business owners are for their employees and how important they are to them and how much it weighs on them when their employees are affected and when their employees aren't there. And so a lot of what I do with them is really just help give them that space to be heard, because they struggle. They struggle with either not knowing what the right decision is to move forward, or they struggle with the decision that they've made and they're still worried about the fact that they had to lay someone off 3 weeks ago and they're still not able to sleep because they're worried about that person and that person's livelihood. So really it's having that space for them that's confidential, that's trusted, that's private, that's judgment free, and that's agenda free, other than to just be supportive, and to provide an outside perspective, but in a really caring way.
And I know you've kind of really worked with a lot of businesses over your 25 year career. What kind of are kind of some basic business things in general
Mm-hmm.
that not many people may know, but that you can guide them through?
Well, I think probably a fundamental principle of what I practice with a lot of clients is the importance of employee development and personal and professional development, right? And in a time of a crisis like this, you would probably think, as many others would, that that's a peripheral thing, and that you know that is not something we're going to do right now. We're going to just focus in on the critical aspect of business. When in reality, again, because of what I said earlier, when you have people that are in a crisis and you have stress levels that are increasing and people being asked to do more, it's actually more important than ever to continue to say, boy, what can we do as a team to get through this crisis together? And that saying in business, never waste a good crisis, is very true right now. So if we can support one another during this, it can be a great team building experience and people will move mountains. Um, so employee development and personal and professional development is always relevant. It's more important now than ever. If people can find the time and the space for it, it's hugely useful and valuable. Um, Also, communication is really a make or break for businesses right now. So when you have a group of people who, again, maybe they are the workers that are fortunate to still have a job, they're feeling shell shocked because of their friend that may not have a job, or they're maybe afraid that maybe in a year they're not going to have a job. So there's all of these fears and dynamics that are going on, and communication is the vehicle that can solve that. Empathy is important right now. All of that comes back to um, being able to really put employees first. And as a leader, being able to think of those folks and figure out, well, geez, you know, maybe it was important to have empathy before. And I heard that empathy is important, but now empathy is the number one skill that a leader can bring to the table for his team. So a general business practice takeaway there is that, doing whatever you can to be the best leader that you can be for yourself, for your family, and for your employees right now would be an incredible use of your time, because nobody has all the answers.
Yeah, and that's a great point. No one has the answers. I think
Yeah.
we're in unknown waters right now.
Yeah.
And I think from talking with people, just friends and family,
Mm-hmm.
you see a lot of individuals that may not have helped in the past helping more. Have you
Right.
seen that around businesses? Have people rallied around businesses that you've seen?
Yeah. So, I've heard and I've seen a lot of great stories where, people at companies and employees and leaders have rallied together to do things that they never thought were possible before, right? And those are those great sort of unexpected blessings that come from difficult times. But you know a couple businesses that I know were able to migrate to a completely virtual environment within 72 hours. I mean, that a year ago would be unheard of. That would be something that people would say we would never be able to do that. So I think that this has taught us that agility, we always thought being agile as a business was important, but now we're seeing that to be true. And it's proving to be true in businesses that quickly made that shift. There's a great sense of pride that comes with that. There's also leaders that I've worked with who've said, my team is remote now and I don't get to see them all the time and I have to change how I lead. And I'm actually really good at it. I'm a very relational leader, they say, and I'm very good at being able to empathize with and relate to the different, people that are working at home. And I've always been very home based, but now have been 100% home based. But I've also had two kids here to try to homeschool during the day between Zoom calls. I mean, it's not, in easy reality for really no matter what your situation is. So I think obviously compassion goes a long way in our community, but it also does within an organization. And I've seen a lot of leaders and a lot of people step up to come together and support one another, whether it's because it's virtual or whether it's because, you have a difficult situation or at home. There's definitely been a lot of that rallying. And I've had a lot of feedback from clients saying, we're proud of what we've done as a company to come together through this.
And I've worked from home for the last 10 weeks, and I know how it's a blessing. It's a challenge as well. I'm fortunate, but I know a lot of people are not. And I've had a lot of, if you want to call them Zoom meetings, WebExes, and you'd have a child jump in or a dog jump in the frame, which I think everyone kind of has more of an openness to saying we understand.
Yes.
And I think that's been done. So, and you're juggling 5 or 6 things at home. So as a mother as well. So how are you juggling all those personally?
I mean, juggling is a great word for it, because it's definitely not it's not a perfect balance, and it always is juggling. And sometimes things are getting almost missed, or trying to fit it all in. It's not really a way where I look at it every day and have the same maybe standards or expectations that I had before. And that was something that I learned really early on. Like, the way that I used to approach my day pre-COVID-19 was really ambitious every day. And it still is. It's just now getting a few things done and a few extra things done on top of the Zoom calls that I already have. That's a productive day. It was a different productive before. It's just a resetting of expectations, because the expectations is where when we place those unrealistic expectations on ourselves, we can really get down and we can get that emotional charge. And there's been a lot of funny memes and things that people have posted, right? Because it's like, people were like, oh, at the beginning of this, it's all these extremes. It's like one person, you're just going to Netflix binge for 3 months, and someone else is like, I'm going to train for a marathon, and there's really not, it doesn't really need to be such an extreme. It's just doing what you can. And my days aren't as just work productive as they were before, but they're demanding and busy, and I'm able to serve and impact folks. And if I have to just we have to do homework at 9:00 at night, that's what we're doing. Or if we're late turning it in, we're late turning it in. I mean, we all have to give ourselves that grace to just say, I'm doing the best that I can. Our teachers are wonderful and they understand. My children's teachers understand that there's working parents in the home. My clients understand, if my daughter pops in. And to your point, those norms are different now than they used to be, because we're all more understanding of one another. And that's obviously a very good thing.
Well, and I think it brings up a good point. Like, one of your kids could come right in and we can have a good laugh at it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, when I'm on conference calls or Zooms, a dog has popped in the back of the screen doing something funny, and we just start laughing, and we have to, or a kid pops in and, hey, hi daddy, or hi mom, how are you? And they don't understand, and they will once they get older. And I think those are the little things that we now appreciate.
Yeah. And, my daughter's young. She's only 9, and she doesn't really necessarily connect the fact that she knows I have to work. But if I'm on back-to-back calls, which many times I am, and many hours will go by, and in between a call, it's like I'll be checking on her and I'll make sure she's got food or whatever she's doing. But she'll start to get frustrated, like, why are you still on the phone? And I'll say, well, I'm working, and, normally you're at school, so you're really not here when I'm working. So to her, she feels like, boy, you're always on the phone and you're always working. But the reality is that's what I do all the time. She's just at school. So it's hard for her to make that connection. So we've all sort of had to learn to be flexible and patient and, roll with the punches.
And I'll actually ask a question off topic. Yeah. What advice can you give other families or parents dealing with the exact same thing that you have, because you do a lot of coaching to families as well as business owners. So just off topic, what kind of advice can you give those families?
Well, I think number one is if you're feeling like something isn't working, it's a good time to sort of take that time to pause or step back or whatever you want to do and say, what's not working here? Is it that I'm trying to do too much in a day? Is it that the kids don't really understand and we need to work on our communication? Is it that I'm over scheduling and I'm over committing? So I think to understand it, it's first figuring out, well, what's working and what's not working. And I think that that's different for everyone. So I think it's the message there is that there's not a one size fits all. So what works for me may not work for someone else, but I've been home based now for 13 years. And many of those years, having been a parent as well. So I've had a lot of time to play around with what works for me and what doesn't. And so, some people are like, hey, I love to just be in sweats all day and that's what makes me comfortable. And others might say, you know what, I don't like that. I like to still get dressed every day. So, there's a full range of what works for people, but you have to at least try something and then say, well, this works for me, or this works for our family, or this doesn't. I try to put some boundaries in terms of evening commitments, because generally there's commitments with the kids, and I do that. I try not to be, when I'm with them, off the phone. Um, and so, I think it's finding that what works for you and for your family, because it's really a personal choice, but it also comes from looking at it, reflecting, and then saying, you know what, I'm going to change this because it's not working as well as I would like. So I'm
And
going to
that,
change.
yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, you're just, it's the unknowns, as I mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where just so many things going on,
Yeah.
where daycares are closed, schools are closed. And
Mm-hmm.
so how is that going to help the families moving forward when, hey, I now have to go to work
Right.
and there is no daycare?
Right.
So it's going to be a little bit of mix of anything. So that's some good advice that I hope people kind of listen and kind of take a step back and kind of
Mm-hmm.
figure out their own norm. And I think that picks up the next stage is, how can leaders thrive right now during this pandemic? I mean, because people may think, I don't either, I'm not open. How do I open? Okay. And the other one's like, okay, I'm unemployed. What do I do? So what does that look like for people?
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's a lot of different scenarios right there. And my heart goes out to people that are unemployed, that are facing that um, threat and that cut to their livelihood. It's a huge blow. And in that's it's a very difficult position to be in. So everyone's personal situation is unique. And I think we all, when we go through a challenging time, or I would call it kind of just this period of, we weren't expecting it, sort of this all of a sudden this, sure, we knew that there was this virus going on, but I don't think anyone really anticipated it would be this dramatic of an effect on our daily life. And so what the steps are for each person to pick up the pieces is obviously a personal choice, and they have to go through what they need to make their right decisions. But I do think that um, working through those stages and recognizing where you are in all those different phases of your emotions is an important place to start, right? Like, number one, starting with saying, hey, let's identify where we're at. Well, we're in a period of time that is unprecedented, is challenging, is unknown, is uncertain. And you then start trying to, as the weeks have gone on here, you kind of try to start moving into different stages of saying, okay, here's all the things that I know I can't control. Here's all the things that are uncertain. But what I do know that's for certain, and what I do know that's enduring for me is, you know, I have my family's support. I still have, knock on wood for everyone, good health. I still have great, relationships or other opportunities. So it's not so much saying, well, things are great when they're not great. It's more so let me identify where I'm at and what makes sense for me. And, it's okay to have dark days and it's okay to have tough times, but identifying what's going to remain for me now and in a year from now. And in the middle of so much chaos changing, maybe I don't want that business. Maybe it was a great income, but maybe that business didn't really fit my life goals and my priorities. And actually, now that I'm not there, maybe I don't know if I want to go back. We have an opportunity now to build the kind of future that we want moving forward. So we have to know that at the end of the day, we've all been through turbulent times before, maybe not on this scale, but we've all been through difficult times in our lives before. And if you're an entrepreneur, you've been through tough times before, because that's the reality of being an entrepreneur is going through tough times. And so what the path forward is for each person is going to look different, but knowing I've been through something difficult before, I'll get through this again. And I know what's always going to remain for me will help you carry forward so that you can make the best right next decision for you and your family.
Well, and I know that when we mention about different people having different paths, especially if you're entrepreneur, Warren Buffett even made a comment a while back ago. I forget what paper it was in. He's like, you're not an entrepreneur unless you failed at least once.
Yeah.
And that could be at a business, that could be at anything that you put your mind to. Mm-hmm. So I think that's some great advice to look at across the board. And no one should ever say, or no one should ever be like, oh, no one can help me. There's always help out there for people, no matter what the situation is.
I totally agree. And even if that help is just a conversation, I mean, the real moment that inspired me to become a coach and to do what I do and to be an advisor to people was through the challenges that I had, and realizing that by working with someone who can help me shift how I think can just change everything. It's like when you shift how you look at something, everything can change. And you could be one conversation away from feeling that same level of, wow, I can figure this out. And in the morning you woke up and you're like, I'm 6 months behind on my bills. I have all these financial difficulties. I'm worried about providing for my kids. And it can seem like everything is over and there's no way out. And there is a way. And there's always someone that cares. And so sometimes just a conversation is all you need to start you on your path forward.
Yeah, and that's something that you can always instill in someone, and just step by step to make sure that, hey, it is a phone call away. You never know. And sometimes just talking.
Well, yeah, and it's not even so much that, I got into this business not because I think I'm an expert on business or that I know more about people's businesses than they do, because truly they know more. More of what I do is the process of creating an environment so that they can really be open and honest about what's working and what's not and where they're at. And by having that clarity, they are really able to help build their own path forward. I just guide them along. I don't, I don't tell people what to do. If they ask my opinion, sure, I'll weigh in. But more of what I do is just helping them get clear. Because a lot of the times when we're in a lot of emotional turmoil right now. There's a lot of challenging things and it's hard to make sense of it. So sometimes you just need to have a conversation with someone who can help you get clarity to figure out where you're at. And then when you know where you're at, you can help to start saying, okay, well, yes, I want to go back to that business, or no, I don't want to go back to that business. Help me figure out what my options are and help them find a path forward that's really right for them.
And that's some great advice. And so you ready to answer some questions from some viewers? So absolutely. This one is from Ben Sell. He asks, how as leaders do we get our organizations, or even further our state, in the mindset for a need to evolve and adapt during and after the virus.
Yeah. So let me make sure I heard it right. So how do we get leaders in our organizations to embrace a mindset to evolve and adapt
Correct.
during and after the
You see it at the
virus?
bottom of the screen?
I can see it now.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, and it's a common challenge I hear about is, how can we get folks to buy in? And so sometimes it takes a lot of creativity, and we're in a period right now where we need to be more creative, right? So, I would say, what has worked in the past to try to get folks to buy into ideas, what has not worked, and what can you look at that within your culture, within the leaders that you work with now, to say, you know was there a particular strategy that worked in the past? Was there a particular voice of influence? Who do people really listen to within that within that within those key stakeholders? Who is the voice of reason, or who is the voice of influence? Um, so I would really take a step back there and reflect to say, let's look at where we've been. Let's look at what's worked before. What were the key turning points that helped us move forward in the past, so that we can really get some buy-in and some groundswell for folks to say, this is um, this is an opportunity to rebuild. I would also say, as a follow-up, in general, anytime that you can provide credible resources, whether it's bringing in some white papers like from McKinsey.com or Forbes. They've got some great resources that really mirror a lot of what I said on this call. Sometimes maybe people seeing it in writing. Um, there's any number of ways, but it's find that resource, find that message, and get really creative in evaluating how you think what will resonate with them.
That's in right now, a lot of, like we were talking earlier, you mentioned about a company in 72 hours going almost virtual from home. And
Right.
that is a huge change in business model.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
so that may help people to say, hey, look, you may kind of want to sit down and reevaluate a strategic plan moving forward for the next year or two, maybe just to show where you'll be, because we don't know if this virus, we're going to have a vaccine in 6 months or a year. So is that something you would maybe recommend to Ben?
The virus piece, or
Like a
the
strategic plan type thing?
reorganizing strategic plan? Well, it's always good to be looking at that and reevaluating it. But ultimately, I look at it creatively and say, what can we do that will help these folks be more open-minded? Lots of times it is bringing in an outside source, you can have an outside person to do a strategic plan. You can bring in a white paper. You can, find lots of research and lots of great articles out there. Um, you can set up a call with an outside person. I mean, that all of those things are great ways to open up perspective and get people to think outside the box.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, Ben, thank you for the question.
Thanks for the question, Beth.
So now we'll have another one. This one was sent private message. This one is from Renee.
Okay.
So I'll post it up here shortly. Here it is. This question is from Ray. What advice, I think we mentioned a little bit about this earlier. What advice would you give a restaurant that is about to open at only 50% capacity? That's a great question.
Yes. And so, if we're looking at it to say, how do we motivate people? How do we keep our team, engaged? How do we, just kind of keep the energy going and being optimistic? I think it's looking for those quick wins, and I think it's celebrating on those quick wins, right? I mean, look at the ways that restaurants have adapted and changed the ways that they're operating and doing business, right? So it's really remarkable, changing to paper menus and all the different things that they've had to do, and they're so committed to customers. That's something to really be proud of. In terms of looking at, if you're looking at saying, well, what advice can you give in terms of to try to be optimistic at opening at 50% and what that might mean long term? I don't think you can really think long term right now. I think the best thing is to just focus on what can we do today to still have our business, to still, be serving customers, and, to still find those quick wins. To just even be open again is something to celebrate. The fact that you've made it to this point and you're opening your doors again is something to celebrate. And I think you try and find those little wins along the way, and have the hope and faith about the long term, and at the same time accepting of what is beyond what we can all control.
And that's I think something that you'll see a lot of moving forward. And there was a question from Jeremy. I don't know if I'll post it, but unless you want to answer it, it just basically says, do you think we will ever go back to everyday life? And let me post that so people can see the question. But thank you, Renee, for the question. It's probably a question everyone asks. And I think Maria gave some great advice, just looking at what you can do today and in the next week to manage that.
Yeah, I think it's much more short term. I think the outlook right now has to be shorter term. And I don't normally, like you said earlier, Tony, about strategic planning. Normally, I'm much more of we've got to think long term and strategically plan. And I do think we always want to be doing that. But I think right now the forefront is large short term and making it through and doing what we love and serving our customers and finding the happiness and why we're in it in the first place and why we're going through all these complexities, because it's where we really want to be, and do our best and do our part. And the longer term is unfortunately uncertain right now, and it's something we have to all unfortunately accept, and there's just no easy way around that. In terms of will we go back to everyday life, I think we're going to go back to everyday life, but I think it's going to be forever changed. I think it's going to be forever different. I think there's going to be kind of just like before 9/11 and after 9/11. It's going to be before COVID-19 and after COVID-19. And I know every single entrepreneur and business owner out there is, if they're not already open, they're desperate to be open. And the ones that have opened are so thrilled to be open. And everyone is just doing their best. But we're going to make decisions differently. We're going to evaluate risk differently. Our society is going to be forever changed by this.
And thank you, Jeremy, for that question. I know a lot of people, the last two questions, probably a lot of people ask that. So I thank you for that question. So I think we're ready to wrap it up. I think we've hit a lot of topics tonight. I think we gave a lot of good advice. Hopefully people can take that as a good advice. And if you want more information about Maria Stevens, you can, what's your website so people can check you out?
It's www.stevenscoaching.com. And also just the email is really easy and quick too. It's maria@stevenscoaching.com, Stevens with a V. And that's an easy way to get in touch with me.
So if you have any more questions for her, you're more than welcome to reach out to her. She's also on Facebook if you want to reach out to her as well. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Spanning the Need. Next week, we'll have Mayor Catherine Miller, first woman ever for the city of Struthers, and we'll talk about how their city is dealing with this pandemic and what the future holds for them. So thank you, be safe, and have a blessed day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Tony.